lot of blood vessels feeding this area, and again, it is mucous membrane, so you should have a lot of moisture there no matter what. But again, you want to make sure that infections are kept at a minimum, and of course, scratches as well. So conjunctivitis, yeah.
Is that what, like, so is like when you have like eye boogers in the morning, is that like the conjunctiva?
Yeah, usually, one of the things it's doing obviously is sweeping the dirt away.
Mm-hmm.
So as you sleep at night, you've got those tear ducts and things working, kind of sweeping things to the corners. So pretty much all day that you have your eyes open gathering that material, at night you do some housekeeping with those areas. So conjunctivitis, or just an inflammation of the conjunctiva caused by contagious pathogens such as bacteria or viruses. Of course, the bacteria, well, both of them are contagious. Actually, pink eye is really contagious. It's amazing if people touch their eyes as much as they do during the day. But the bacteria, obviously not as bad as the viral. Viral, pretty much the treatment is try and keep it as clean as possible. And there are some drops that they'll give you, but there's not much they can do for viral. It's the bacterial that they have the antibiotic. Clear on its own. It is well fed. You can have this also caused by environmental irritants and allergens such as smoke, pollen, animal dander, because really all it is, again, is just inflammation of that mucous membrane. In newborns, you can have a couple of different versions, chlamydial conjunctivitis and gonorrheal conjunctivitis, but only if you have what type of birth? Vaginal birth, and of course you either have chlamydia or gonorrhea at the time of your birth when you're pregnant. So, of course, as you pass through the canal, you're going to pick up those bacteria. Now, obviously, those diseases in childbirth don't go hand in hand, but it actually is better for the child to have a vaginal childbirth. Why is that? Good for, yeah, it's just health-wise for the baby, it's better to be born that way. Why else? The vaginal bacteria. It's actually, it's been scientifically shown that if you have a vaginal birth, the children have a much better immune system starting out just because of the bacteria that they're going to come into contact with, which definitely goes hand in hand. Obviously, you don't want those type of bacteria, but you do get a good type of bacteria as you do come through there. So, of course, if left untreated, all of these infections could lead to blindness simply because the not the irritation, but the inflammation is going to cause damage. All right, so again, pictures, if you're looking at pictures that you need to make sure that you memorize or at least know for the exam, this would be one of them. All right, so we've got our eye anatomy. Along the outside, the outer, harder covering or surface is the sclera. Along the middle portion is the choroid. And then along the inside is the retina. So you can see the choroid here is in the middle. That's where your blood vessels and smooth muscle and connective tissue tend to hang out. Of course, the outside, the sclera, is all tough connective tissue. It's a little bit easier to see through here. And then, of course, along the inside is the retina, and those are the cells that are going to take that light and convert that light into an electrical energy that your brain can interpret. All right, we'll actually get to those cells here in a little bit. You've got the macula lutea and the fovea centralis, two separate different areas. Basically, this is where the cells that differentiate between light and dark and color are going to be actually focused. So it's right directly in the back. And of course, this little area back here is kind of like our, when you see those red eyes in pictures, that's pretty much what's happening is they have this area and this area kind of focused right in the middle of the lens, and the light is just bouncing back at the camera, and that's usually what's happening. So for people that always have those red spots on their eyes for the camera, you're looking directly at the camera lens. Maybe you want to look somewhere else, like at the person's head or a little bit lower than the camera, and that way you're still looking at the camera but not looking directly at the camera lens. Otherwise, on the front portion and the anterior portion, we have the ora serrata. the ciliary body, the suspensory ligaments, and then the iris, the cornea, the pupil, and the lens. So all of this is going to be how much light we're going to be letting in and what kind of light we're actually looking at. So the cornea, outer covering, and notice it is actually just a continuation of the sclera, but of course it's going to be a see-through portion of the sclera. We have our iris, which is the actual covering for the pupil. The pupil is the opening. And then of course the lens. The lens is going to help filter the light as it comes in and focus it so that these cells can then interpret the signal that's coming through. So that's your light aperture area. You've got an anterior chamber and a posterior chamber. These are actually separate chambers in the eye, and you have these ciliary body cells that are making the eye fluid so that you have pressure out here and you have fluid coming through and always bathing these cells as well. And then along the inside you have the vitreous body, and then again that's full of fluid as well. So both the front portion or the anterior portion of the eye and then of course along the back is all full of fluid. So if you take the fluid out of all of this, you're really just looking at it at an open sac. Essentially is what you're looking at, of course lined with cells on the inside. All right, so you can kind of see here the choroid. They're putting all of the blood vessels here in the choroid, and then that of course is going to feed the inside of the eye. So when you go to the eye doctor and they're looking in your eyes, they're going to be looking at these blood vessels. Why would they look at the blood vessels?
If you're not getting the proper blood supply, your eyes aren't going to be working.
Yeah, so if you have too much pressure, right? A lot of people have high blood pressure. That's going to lead to a diabetic condition, but high blood pressure also damages the eyes because of the high blood pressure in the blood vessels. And again, very sensitive area. And you need all these blood vessels in prime working order, just like the heart. Of course, when they are not, they're not going to be able to bring nutrients and oxygen and take away waste products as effectively. From the wall of the eyeball, again, the sclera, the choroid, and then the retina. We've got our optical area, so the lens apparatus, it admits and focuses the light. It's these four up here, along with the suspensory ligaments, the ciliary body, and the oris aurata. And then you have the neural region, so the retina, the optic nerve, and that's going to form the image and then send it to the brain. So you've got cells lining the back here, and they're going to be able to interpret the light coming in and then send that signal through the optic nerve into the brain. Yes.
As far as the blood vessels go and making sure that there's enough blood flowing to the eye,
Yes.
is that why that's a serious symptom for diabetic people? Because I had an aunt who passed away from being diabetic, and
That's one of the first things they lose besides limbs is they're going to lose their eyes. A lot of it has to do with, of course, if you have too much glucose in the blood, that tends to attract a lot of bacteria. And so a lot of times you'll end up with too much bacteria in the blood supply just because they're naturally drawn in. But what's worse is you, especially in a diabetic condition, you tend to take these very small arterioles and venules and damage them, and also damage the nerve endings. So they talk about diabetic neuropathy, and that's really what's going on is you're damaging the smallest arterioles and venules that you have, and of course those are the areas that are feeding, the eyes and everything else, especially in the limbs as well. So
that's because of essentially too much glucose.
Too much glucose, and then it usually leads to other problems. If you have too much glucose, eventually it's going to go hand in hand with high blood pressure as well. So they tend to go together. And of course, if you have high blood pressure, you're more likely to end up with diabetes as well. So, because they both end up damaging the cardiovascular system. The fibrous layer. It's the outer fibrous layer, contains the sclera. That's your dense collagenous white layer. And then, of course, for the eye pupil itself, you have the cornea. That's the transparent area of the sclera, and it allows in light. Oh, why the hell I can't talk today? It's typical Monday for me. All right, the timula tunic vasculosa. I don't know why I'm trying to say these words. Or the vascular layer. The middle vascular layer contains the choroid. It's vascular, pigmented, dark layer behind the retina. So it's going to be supporting the retina. So all those cells that are converting that light signal into electricity is being supplied by the choroid. You have the ciliary body, it's the muscular ring, supports the lens and the iris, the anterior, and it produces the aqueous humor. The aqueous humor is that fluid that fills the front of the eye. And then we have our suspensory ligaments. They support the lens and iris from the ciliary body and help focus that lens and make sure you're getting the light in the proper areas, right? So this is what's going to cause the farsightedness and nearsightedness is a weakness in the suspensory ligaments. And then the iris and the pupil. The iris is that colored diaphragm that controls the size of the pupil, the outer area, and then the pupil is that central opening of the iris which allows in the light. And then the tunica interna, that's your retina, the layer where the light is focused to form an image. And then the optic disc in the back. That's the beginning of the optic nerve where the retinal nerves converge. So when we were looking back here, there's a couple of different areas you should concern yourself with. You have the fovea centralis, and that's where all of these cells tend to focus, which is directly in the back here. This is your dead spot. This line spot that we talk about, basically it just means that there aren't any cells here to convert, because that's all just nervous tissue sending the signals to the back. So in this back area of the eye, and this is not directly behind, of course, the light coming in, it's actually offset. So this picture is nice for that. There might be a picture in the text which has the blind spot directly behind the pupil, and that's not the way it works, obviously, because the light's going to come in, and you want it somewhere in that directly middle area behind where the light's coming in. So there's a couple of different pictures from these different texts for the eyeball. The scleral venous sinus. This is the area where we're looking at the aqueous humor. Notice that there is different areas here, and there's actually two different little sacs back here for the vitreous humor. It's not all one compartment. I know it kind of shows it that way on the other eye picture, but there should be a spot where they show a separation. Yeah, kind of like in here, right? So this is one orb, and then this is the other orb. You can see they're actually separated in the back. The vitreous humors are separated. So they're kind of showing the aqueous humor flow in the front. So the cells here at the ciliary body are producing the fluid, and then it is flowing up and then through out this way. So you have both sides keeping that pressure. So there's a couple of different reasons. You want to make sure you've got fluid flowing through here so that you can get nutrients, oxygen coming in, right? And then of course carrying the wastes away. And you also want to make sure you have pressure to make sure everything is actually inflated out here. If there wasn't any constant fluid pressure, this would sink back in and your light wouldn't focus properly. So you want to make sure that everything is full of those aqueous humors and keeping the light coming in the way it should be. So again, our eyes were evolved to actually see underwater. We're supposed to be able to see underwater. We see underwater very, very well. Our eyes don't work so well now that we're out here in the dry air. We have had to make some allowances for those differences. So the optical components allow light into the eye and then focus the image on the retina, or those cells in the back. Cornea is that transparent area of the sclera, allows in the light. Lens is going to basically help shape that light or focus that light into the back, right? So when you want thicker suspensory ligaments, that's basically their lack. And when they're lack, what does that mean? Or slack, sorry. When they're slack, what does that mean?
Loose.
Yeah, they're loose, which means you're trying to open that iris up, right? Or that lens. And of course, when they're flattened, that means the ligaments are taut, and that's when you're actually trying to focus more of that light towards the back. The aqueous humor, it's that serous fluid anterior to the lens and posterior to the cornea. So it is at the anterior portion of the eye. It's produced by the ciliary body and reabsorbed by the canal of Schlemm. Of course, that's probably the poor guy's name that spent his life studying the eye, so he gets to name it after himself. And it's produced and reabsorbed at the same rate, so the amount is constant. Now, of course, if there's some sort of disease that would cause this to be different, that would, of course, affect your eyesight, right? Because you need to make sure that cornea is staying out so it could help focus the light in through the eyeball. And then you have the vitreous body in the back, and that's your jelly-like fluid that actually fills the eyeball. So again, a little bit different here, right? This is a jelly-like system or jelly-like fluid where it's going to be a little bit more thick. The aqueous humor is definitely more of just a thin fluid that makes its way through the front or the anterior of the